pronounce his name properly again?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, cool. Hi, nice to meet you. On that front though, I had the same, like, I guess, I don't need this. Do I need this?
No, it's okay.
I don't know if that's a compliment, but it's okay. Yeah, like, you know, you can have outcome-based thesis, outcome-based research is for everyone. But, you know, I had same thing, so my thesis became much on methodology, so it became a methodological thesis. And it changes the whole thing. And I think methodological theses are more useful because it talks about applicability and...
That's on my supervisor.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, okay. My name is Tanay. If you can't understand me, just put your hand up and I'll repeat myself. I'm from New Zealand. So the New Zealand accent is a bit... it's very hard to understand. No, but okay, look, you laugh at me now, but the way that I'm talking to you now is not a New Zealand accent as such. So when I've worked in, I've had the privilege to work in Philippines and Thailand, and I've learned certain ways and mannerisms of saying things that are a bit more understandable to people than my New Zealand accent. You don't feel that. I'm from India originally, actually. Riaz, but I was from the Philippines, which I'm not from the Philippines, but I'm from India originally. I moved to New Zealand when I was 7, and I did the rest in. So my background is in geography, human geography, and I've done a bit of research regarding how to interact with communities around the world, and something called community-based practice. Okay, I often, when I did geography in undergrad, a lot of people ask me, you know, what is the capital of Nairobi? They ask me these questions like that. We had that. Nairobi is not a capital. Nairobi is a capital of Kenya. But geography is not just about these things. Geography is about practice as well. And so this is one example of practice. And hopefully, I mean, mostly undergrads, right? Yeah, most undergrads. Hopefully, you guys will take this further, not only in the research sense, but there's more people. Well, not in the research sense, but in the practice sense as well. So this is an example. So the P's of participation. Participation. Okay, so in my thesis, I spelled this word wrong in the title, and I caught it way too late. So you always have to be careful. So what is okay? Are we familiar with development in general? Does anyone know? Has anyone seen this? Okay, so this is actually my supervisor's work, and he doesn't like me citing him at all, but I will. And there's problems with this, which I guess I'm being recorded, which means he'll see this. Okay, it's fine. So we have in development, you have all these things that work together for the sake. There are so many people coming. It's good, but if any more people have to use a microphone, I don't want to do that. There are a lot of stages when you do development work. The development sector is huge, right? You have professional developers around the world. You know, you have big organizations like United Nations, UNDP, you have like World Bank. You have NGOs, like Oxfams and UNICEFs and stuff like that. And then you also have smaller scale development actors, and a lot of them work in nations all around the world. But there's an inordinate, so there's a lot of focus based on places like Africa and Asia, because these organizations, these approaches seem to target regions like Indonesia and Philippines and India, and, because they want to develop it, right? And there's huge problems in that rhetoric, in that argument, but we'll get to that. So. When you do development work, there are lots of stages that are involved. So you have the first stage, the needs and resources assessment stage, right? This is pretty much a roadmap for development projects, how development happens. Yeah, so you'll keep that. Yeah. Welcome though, don't feel like unwelcome. Okay, cool. So yeah, you have the. My name is Tanay. Anyone? I'm not doing it again. You have lots of stages. Again, if you don't understand what I'm saying or have any problems with my accent or content, just let me know. Okay, no worries. So you have this stage, and so this is very important. You have, and we've alluded to this already, you have the top-down actors, and then you have the bottom-up actors, right? So you have top-down influences, which are people like government and big organizations that work from a higher level, both in terms of funding and access to information and resources and all that, and they exert their influence downwards, right, to top-down. Does that make sense? For example, like a government is like a top-down approach, right? So they make decisions, and they disseminate or implement decisions downwards, right? I mean, governments aren't accountable to anybody. That's another question. Accountable to the people. So you have that coming down, and so scientific knowledge is the stuff you learn, the way of thinking, the discourse, the hegemonic. So that is this, and so knowledge is transferred downwards, and so we've applied things like, in this sense, GIS and scientific data onto needs resources assessments, right? Make sense? So you go in and say to a place, you go somewhere and you say, what do these people need? What do we identify as needed here? Or else you have a project and you say that the project needs us to do this, this, and this. So you apply scientific knowledge. So on the other end is local knowledge. So this is very important. In fact, I think out of all of this, this is probably the most important and probably the most concerning thing. And we've already alluded to this again, the synergy, man, synergy. So, local knowledge. The way that people do things in a community, in a village, in a town, or anywhere is the most important thing. The way that I do things doesn't matter to you. And the way that you do things, that's a lie. But it's very much to me. But you know what I mean, right? So like, you may have a certain way of thinking or a certain way of doing things that has been established for a long time. And that is an incredible thing. It's history, it's culture, it's tradition. So, the way that you do things doesn't necessarily mean it's worse because it's indigenous, because it's local. The way that science and the Western hegemony seems to think that the best practice is a scientific practice, what is right. But it's wrong. It's not necessarily, the way that you do things is different. Local traditions is just, does that make sense? I've written an entire thesis on this very recently, so like it's in the forefront of my brain, and so I'm just rambling, and so if I'm repeating myself, it's to a stressful point. So to approach any project, you need to incorporate local knowledge too. Don't write things down. Jesus, I'm not like a lecturer. Okay, what are you going to think? God dang it, this thing's being recorded, these things. So knowledge, right? So the way that people do things is very important. And the scientific, this is not to say this is unimportant, it's very important too. Science has measurability, abilities, all that. So you've got that interplay. And this both informs the assessment, the initial project creation. So that leads into the next stage, which is now a dialogue. Now the problem with this roadmap is that dialogue should be happening at all occasions. This dialogue should be the central point of everything. But so you have the inside actors, local people, including marginalized groups, very important. And then you have the outside actors, which is the scientists, NGOs, the top-down actors, right? So a dialogue happens. A dialogue. What is a dialogue? Anyone? Layman's terms. What's a dialogue? Come on, everybody. I got this. A dialogue is. So, Adi, what's a dialogue? I know your name, so yeah.
Dialogue.
No, just the word. Any word.
Okay, like conversation or speaking?
Yeah, exactly. A conversation, a discussion, right?
Yeah.
That's a dialogue, right? You guys know this. Come on. Capital, where's the palm? You guys already know this. Come on, you guys know this. When you two talk, it's a dialogue. It's a conversation, right? What I'm doing to you is considered a dialogue. If I didn't ask you any questions and I just spoke to you, it doesn't really satisfy what a dialogue is, but it's very top down, right? So I'm talking to you. I'm not talking with you. The conversation is in there. I mean, there is now between me and Mr. Adi here, but in the general sense. So this is a top down interaction, right? So I'm not asking you for opinions. Well, I am, but not on another traditional lecture or a presentation. I'm not consulting you for your ideas. I'm just telling you what I know, and I'm not really valuing what you know, because I'm assuming you don't know what I know. Does that make sense? So this is that's nice. You guys said yes. When I asked that question at home, when I lecture at home, nothing. When someone says, "Oh, hello everyone," you guys said hello. What? Where am I? Okay, so this is important. So a top-down dialogue is when the outsider folks come in and say everything. They don't listen to what the local people do or what they think and what they talk. This feeds into local knowledge, right? So they don't ask them. And so when you lead into the action phase, you need to have an initiative that includes both bottom-up and top-down, right? That top-down, bottom-up dialectic should be a dialectic. It should be, I don't even know the dialectics, but it should be both, right? It should be people coming from the outside with their resources and their knowledge, scientific, whatever, and the local people contributing their information. Does that make sense? This is very important. So for good development programs to exist, it should be an interplay between top-down and bottom-up initiatives, bottom-up forces. Yeah? So that leads into participation. So participation is a practice. Okay, so I'm being recorded, I think, right? See, my supervisor is going to see this, and he's going to hate what I say because you said it wrong. You didn't. So just take what I said with a grain of salt. But participation, in essence, I wrote a thesis on this session on this, is a voluntary process by which people influence or control the decisions that affect them. Yeah. So going back to the map before, participation is all about getting all of these guys involved. It's also that too, but it's all about this. This isn't a development context. Participation can happen anywhere. It can happen in education. It can happen in business. It can happen anywhere. This is participation in itself. This is not just, in this sense, is this. The voluntary process by which people influence and control their decisions. So participation is about asking people, talking to people, and getting them involved, right? Makes sense? Very easy. So this leads to what is called empowerment. When you talk to someone and you ask them, what do you think? How would you do it? What are your suggestions? It's allowing them a platform to discuss and share their ideas. And that is, in essence, what empowerment really is the process through which people and households gain greater power to decide. Right? Empowerment. So you're powerless if a government tells you, hey, I'm going to rip up your house because an airport is going to come right through here. And it's happened. It happens at home. It happens everywhere. You're powerless to do something. But that's a position where you're not consulted, you're not talked to, you just said this is what's going to happen. Conversely, an empowering situation is if an initiative or something came up to you and said, what do you think? I've got the resources, and I've got the information. I can ask you guys. You can direct me. What do you guys need here? What do you want to do? Yeah, and that leads to empowerment. Does that make sense? It's like a cloud. The word empowering is like a fog. I'm just making this up now, so yeah. Empowerment is like a fog. You can see it, kind of, but you can't really touch it, right? That's brilliant. I'm gonna write that down. Ah man. Oh, good. This is good. So yeah, it's like a fog, right? But it's there. Empowerment is there. It can happen. So okay. So this is just very theory based. I'm going to go over it very quickly so we can get to the actual stuff. So empowerment. There's a lady called Einstein. Yeah, she's a lady, and she made something called the ladder of citizen participation. Citizen participation is what we're saying, participation. It's about power. So when development initiatives apply participation, so the way that the theory so far of participation sounds good, right? For the most part, it's good to involve people. It makes sense, right? And so for the most part, now participation has become something of like all the top-down initiatives and actors like it when projects have participatory actions in it, right? When a funding initiative or whatever initiative, development initiative says, look, we've done participation, we've talked to the locals, we've had them. The agency will be like, yes, very good. We can go forward. I like what you're doing because this is good. It makes sense. You talk to locals, but has that really happened? Right? You got to question our new friends. Hi. My name is Tanay. You've got this. And this talks about, it questions, it shows different time. I mean, this is not an exhaustive list, and it's been built upon because it's from 1969 now. The ways in which participation manifests in practice. How people put development professionals and NGOs, whatever, use participation. And this is not just development, it can be anything. So on the bottom of the ladder you have non-participation. When you have manipulation and therapy, right? The stuff that are, these people will come and say, we're going to do participation, but they're not doing any of this. So this is all about, manipulation. You know what that means, right? So it's not genuine at all. I mean, I'm going to skip over this. But informing is now reaching into tokenistic participation. Informing is, this is what people do. Like, this is legitimately what people do. Initiatives and governments will come and say, yeah, look, we're going to build you guys a dam. A dam. We're going to build you guys a dam. You good? And then someone will be like, yeah. Okay, cool. Participation done. And they'll write this big thing on their list and their project report. They say, we consulted the local people, we told them, and that's it. And that is what they call informing. We just informed you. Is it real participation? No, right? I didn't ask you anything. I just told you. I mean, I asked you, you good? And you said, yeah, and that's it. That's not participation. That's disingenuous, right? That word? I use disingenuous so often in my thesis. That's a great word. It's disingenuous. So then you have things like consultation and implication. Consultation is very good. So a lot of development professionals now call themselves consultants, right? That's the big word. Technically, I'm a consultant. I hate myself. I'm not a consultant. A consultant, it's a big development work where you get an outsider actor to come in and consult with the process and then ask them for their thoughts and all that, which is good. You get a variation of insights, which is fine. Again, JC will critique me from what I've been saying. You're wrong. Just talking rubbish, whatever. But in participation, consultation is when I just engage with you guys, and it's not really getting to the bottom of the issue. I'm sort of leading up to what I would like to hear, sort of. It's really hard to define this, and I'm making a terrible mess. So let's skip over this part. And then we can go to degrees of citizen power. Citizen control, delegated power, and partnerships. So this is when participation happens. This is when a development initiative or a development practice actually goes to the people and gives them power and resources so they can start affecting the process. Does that make sense? Right? So partnerships is when we partner up with communities and we say, look, let's develop something together. Let's make something that we can both create together. Right? And then finally we have citizen control, where complete power is afforded to the local people. Complete power. So for example, say if I have money, in terms of like a initiative, and I give everything to you guys, you being the local community, everything. So you decide the parameters, you decide the funding, you decide everything. That's what citizen power. Citizen power also refers to organic participation stuff. So real grassroots stuff. So stuff that actually emerges from the people themselves. Right? It doesn't involve people from outside coming in and saying, look, we need you to do this and this. It involves people, you guys, saying, we need this, so we're going to make something. So like cooperatives and stuff like that, it's like local bottom-up approaches. Does that make sense? Sort of? We'll get there. So, relating it to this, and my research and my field and my, whatever, community-based disaster risk reduction. So in disaster, are you guys familiar with DR, disaster risk reduction, sort of, maybe, a little bit? So, I mean, again, I'm going to butcher this because it's none of this, but, in a disaster, there's hazards, right? Hazards happen. You heard the word natural disaster? You heard that? So, okay, I'm going to go into this spiel. Again, you're probably familiar with this. There's no such thing as a natural disaster. You know this? You don't know. You would know. You already know. You know everything. So, disaster, there's no such thing as a natural disaster. There's nothing natural about a disaster. Right? There's such thing as hazards, natural hazards. If a typhoon or earthquake hit the coast of Antarctica, would that be a natural disaster? I mean, think about it. Like, would it? Like, would you call it a disaster? I mean, okay, maybe I should have asked that question after I explained this. Okay, the explanation is, disaster doesn't happen until a hazard hits a vulnerable community, or hits a community, hits a human settlement, right? Because if a hazard just hit Antarctica, it's just a hazard. If a typhoon hit the coast of Antarctica, there's no one there. It doesn't get, I mean, penguins are there, I guess. But you know what I mean when I say this. A disaster has to hit, a hazard has to hit a human population to be a disaster. And so human populations are very interesting because they have a whole host of vulnerabilities and they have a host of capacities in a disaster, right? So to really reducing that, they have a set of things that they're attributes that make them more risky, weaknesses, right? And they have strengths and abilities that they help them cope through a disaster. That makes sense. Right? So capacities and vulnerabilities, and the interaction between the two will sort of help, will sort of feed into how vulnerable people are in a disaster and whatever. So, for example, right, a rich 35-year-old man that owns his own house, right, and has connections, has a cell phone and a car. Okay, compare that situation, right? Compare this situation to a pregnant 19-year-old girl with no car, no cell phone. So, in a disaster setting, what would happen? What would happen? Like, who is worse off? Come on, it's a question. The answer is what? Come on, who is worse off in a disaster? I'm not gonna get to you like here the word that I'm looking for. It's the woman, right?
Yes.
Right? Because she's got more vulnerabilities, right? She's got pregnancy, she's carrying a baby. She has no car. She has no cell phone. But this man has a cell phone, has a car, has money, has a house, has all these things that helps him when it comes to disaster. That's very interesting. So understanding that people are different in their vulnerabilities and capacities is what makes disaster risk reduction. Understanding that people have these things and identifying ways in which we can help reduce the risk of a disaster by addressing these vulnerabilities and by strengthening these capacities, right? Addressing vulnerabilities like, you have no car. What can we do? What can we do to give you transportation? We as in, not us, but people at large. What can society afford? People like this. Does that make sense? So it happens not just to pregnant women, it happens to everyone. Like people that are really poor, don't have so many vulnerabilities. They live in really poor areas, right? Like Riaz was telling me about her master's work in the place you're saying that the groundwater is coming, the grounds are sinking, and we talked about whether the rich folk are better off because they can move to the highlands, but the poor folk don't have that. They're in the middle of the sinking ground. Imagine if your ground was sinking, like the ground under you is sinking and it's flooding every single day, and you have no money to get yourself out of the situation. Disaster risk reduction aims, well, this is bombastic, but it looks at these things and say, how can we, create a more even landscape, playing field. So, community-based disaster risk reduction. So we talked about, in which at-risk communities are actively engaged in the identification, analysis, treatment, monitoring, evaluation, disaster risks in order to reduce their vulnerabilities and enhance their capacity. This is where participation comes in, right? So participation is a community-based practice. How can we go to people and ask them about their vulnerabilities and ask them about their capacities and say, we can work with you to the effect of this. Reduce and enhance. Make sense? Yeah? Okay, so let's do a small activity. Okay, it's gonna be painful if you don't talk to me, but I'm gonna force you to talk to me. Okay, so we have women and we have men. I'm not gonna call you boys and girls because you're women and men. We have women and we have men here, right? No, Ms. Fa? Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you about 10 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to going to ask you to do this, and I'm going to talk about what I did, what we did, and we're going to move from there. So 5 groups, and in groups of 5 can women and men split up. So I want, see you as a 5. So this is a group of 5 guys, right? Can I have another group of 5 guys, and the same with girls? So we have different groups of girls, different groups of guys. Can we do that? Just move around. It doesn't matter. It only takes 10 minutes. So go.
Lima laki-laki.
It doesn't have to be 5 exactly. There's a little bit more it can be, but.
So we'll have my group.
Okay, we got there? Want to start? Okay, so in your group, can you discuss? I want you to reflect on. We talked about vulnerabilities before, right? So how in a disaster setting, what would be the things that would make people weak or more susceptible, right? Weakness. I want you to reflect on each other's gender vulnerability. Okay, so the groups of guys in your groups, think about what are the things they think would make a woman vulnerable. Okay? And girls, think about what do you think that would make a man vulnerable in a disaster.
What makes people vulnerable?
I don't know what you're doing, but does that make sense? So just write down, just generally, that's all I ask. Just write down. Discuss and write down.
What makes people
No? Does that make sense? Yes, that's what I'm thinking. So, thank you so much. Okay, so this exercise took longer than it should have. This is your fault. And actually, this exercise is part of a wider exercise. The wider exercise is called the Johari window, which we look at, it breaks up into 4 quadrants, and you ask different groups of people to discuss different things. What we know, right? And what they know. What we don't know, and what they don't know. Right? So what we did today is what they know, and what they know about us. Right? Does that make sense? So the point here is, so we've got a whole lot of things. Normally we do this with, manila paper, the big flip charts, big pieces of paper, we put it on the wall and we give people pens and whatever, and they do it on the wall, and I don't like using this, but I decided to use it for whatever reason, so it's fine. So we have a whole lot of answers here. Some of the answers are the same. I mean, we've got more sickness, we've got the physical, we have all of that. Some of them are very different, We've got things like responsibility and pregnancy, period, and Mr. Arif, again, is not brave. Broken heart. So we have these things. So what does this say about men and women? Like, what conclusions can we draw from this exercise? In terms of perspectives, men and women's perspectives. Anything?
They have different vulnerabilities.
Yes, they have different vulnerabilities, and
To address those vulnerabilities, to reduce those vulnerabilities, there will be a different way.
perfect. Yes, so that's exactly what I'm looking for. Things like this. So there are different ways to address things, and there are different things to address. And there are also different perspectives, right? So what you think they think is, and what they think you think is completely different. So even within a group, even within a community, even within a classroom like this, you guys are all students, right? You guys are very similar, but this exercise shows that you guys are in fact very different. And this is not just for disasters, vulnerability disasters, everything. Opinions and perspectives on everything. The way people should do things, the way people should behave, the way people think, they're different. And the way that you think, or the way that you do stuff is not necessarily the same as how other people think that you do stuff, right? The stuff that you have in your possessions or your skill sets is not what they think that you necessarily have, and the other way goes for sure. Does that make sense? So, this is what I mean. Participation. So this exercise is called it's participatory exercise. So So what I did was, I got you guys to identify your own weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Well, I mean, I would, after this, I'll start talking about what you think your own vulnerabilities are, but this is a classroom. So, but it sort of illustrates that there are different perspectives involved. And participation in community-based management, community-based practice, and disaster risk reduction is about this. CBDRR, community-based disaster risk reduction, is about this. Identifying that you guys have different ideas and perspectives and things, and working a way in which we can incorporate that view into practice. Yeah? So, going back to what I was talking about, how long ago, and I'll be quick because I'm talking a long time. So I'm going to use something called participatory 3D mapping in La Trinidad, Philippines as an example of participatory work. Okay? So, 3D maps is a map that is three-dimensional. Does that make sense? It's a 3D map. So what does that mean? It's got a width, it's got a length, and it's got height. Okay? So have you guys seen topographical maps? Like the relief maps and stuff, You see there's lots of lines and stuff, it shows different elevations. So a 3D map takes that and elevates and makes it takes a two-dimensional map like that and makes it three-dimensional. So it illustrates different levels. So in the end, you have a model of whatever you're mapping. Okay? So where I did was I worked in La Trinidad in the Philippines, northern Philippines, in the mountainous municipality. And they've got their neighborhoods are called barangays. They've got like different barangays. There's 21 barangays in La Trinidad. I worked with 5 of them, and we created a map for disaster risk reduction purposes, but we'll get to why it's not just for that. So the whole map process from start to finish, point 1 to point 1000, was participatory. It was made by the local people. So I didn't do anything. These are all local guys. I was just there to show, me and a few other people were just there to show them how, but they would do the what, and the when, and everything else, right? So I'll just show them. They'll actually do the how. So what we did was, we started with a big map, and then we used styrofoam to, because La Trinidad is a very hilly place. It's in the mountains, Cordillera Mountains, right in the middle of the mountains. So as a result, there's lots of, it's a steep area that goes up and down. So we use different pieces of styrofoam to show different levels, and we stack them with glue, and then we make this model like this. And so ultimately, what we had was a model like 1.6 meters long, 1.5 meters long, 1.5 meters. That was to scale. That's very important. To scale. So the map, the distances on the map relates to the distances in real life, right? To scale, get that? Yeah. So that's very important. So what we did was after that started paper mache, and we created this base map. So my talk is called the P's of participation. There are 3 P's of participation. So participation is made up of 3 core elements. This is actually wrong, and I can't believe I wrote that. P is for participants. This is, oh my god. This is why you don't do it for 10-hour flight. You change something last minute. Okay, so this is participants. P is for participants, P is for process, and P is for power. Okay, so these 3 elements, and we've actually highlighted a lot of these elements already, make up what is participatory action and what is participation, what is involving local people in a development initiative, right? Those 3 things. So the first one talks about participants. Participants are the people that participate, right? People. So if we did an exercise, you guys are the participants. And in the participants, there's a whole lot of differences. There's women, there's men. There's 28-year-olds. There's, I think you're 26.
27.
You're 27. What? You look so young.
Thank you.
See, that's the problem. I look very young. I am young. I'm like 24, which is young. But and especially at home in New Zealand, everyone's really tall. So I look 12 comparatively. So it's and so I come to places like Southeast Asia when Mr. Adi is 27 years old and he looks as young as I am, or just a little bit older. And I'm like, so there's sorry. Well, I'll grill him.
He's not agree that you say it.
You think he looks old? I think he's old.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Arif, how old are you? 21? 21. See, Mr. Arif in New Zealand was not 21. See, but that's not the point. So you've got 21-year-olds, you've got 27-year-olds, you know, we've got different ages, you've got different genders, you've got different backgrounds. You know, some people's parents here are probably very wealthy, own businesses and shops. And, you know, the likelihood is that other people's parents are not so wealthy. Yeah? And so so there's a huge amount of difference in any community. Communities doesn't have to be neighborhoods, doesn't have to be villages, doesn't have to be towns or countries, it can be anything. This is a community of university students, right? This is a community of women, community of men. So whenever you're talking about the word community, it's a very problematic term. Community can be anything, whether it be physical locations or relationships as well. But in this case, we're talking about the barangay. So in a barangay, in a neighborhood, there are lots of different communities. Okay? And that's what makes the P of participants so important. You need to include people of all walks of life in a map like this, in a participatory exercise. Because the map, okay, I didn't even explain what the map is. The map is a three-dimensional model, right? And it shows a whole lot of information, and we'll get to that. And the point is, it shows accurate information about the communities we're talking about. And we'll get to what information it is. But in order for people to produce a map that shows information about them, you need people to show that information in the first place. How can you talk about poor people's livelihoods and poor people's information if you don't involve poor people in the process? How can you talk about, so you know how you said you identify things about women, you identify things about men, there's a lot of things you did not identify, right? There's a lot of things that you did not identify that they said things, and vice versa. We didn't talk about that, but in order for you to gain that insight into people's conditions, especially for disaster risk reduction, you have to involve them. And that is why participants is so important. Maintaining what we call heterogeneity. A heterogeneous participant base. Lots of people. And also, it begs the question of, just because there's lots of people, does that mean that it has diversity? You can have men and women that's heterogeneous, but that, if they're from the same household, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily diverse. Make sense? So there's levels to this. And then you have the process. The process is what participatory activities we're doing. In this case, P3DM. And in the process, there's a whole lot of stuff to do. So the first thing we did was mapping disaster histories. Am I still okay for time? If I'm getting boring, just let me know because I can speak. This is, I found this really interesting. We call it disaster history. So we got the people to talk about their past disasters as a group. The whole community got together and said, what do you think, what happened in 1986, 1991? And they wrote what happened, where did it occur, the date, who was affected, what was affected, how did the community cope short term, and how did the community recover long term. So we identified these different aspects of disasters that happened in the past. And from there, we asked the communities to break up things into their strengths, their weaknesses, and their hazards. And we did lots of community exercises where we said, the group split up into 3 different groups and they rotated around. They identified it. And eventually we got large bits of paper that showed them different aspects. So people said that our biggest strength was their community hall, where our biggest strength was the fact that we had 3 schools. And while this is important, it doesn't show how important these things are. Yeah? So for example, you can have the fact that we have a hospital, the fact that we have a deep well, and the fact that we have some guy said, a store that sells flashlights. Okay? And all 3 of them are strengths of a community. But you've got to think about it. How much more of a strength is having a hospital than having a store with a flashlight? Right? So the information, naming the information is not enough. We want to weight the information. We want to rank them and say, add depth to the numbers, right? So this is not just a qualitative approach, it's a quantitative approach. We want to generate numbers. So what we did was we gave them candies, and we said, look, here's 5 candies per person. Put the candy on the top, on the subject that you think is the most important to you. So if you think hospitals is a really important, one of those important things, put 4 pieces of candy on there if you want. Then you have 1 piece, whatever. Does that make sense? So afterwards you have a numbers-based output from a qualitative scale, right? Yes? So from there, this is what we had. So we had, crack on the side of young Ben. There were 6 people said that was very important. 6 waivers. Dengue outbreak was 11 votes. So burning garbage or erosion or crimes or fire or improper garbage disposal wasn't as bad to them as a dengue outbreak. And this is what is really important. We got them to identify what they thought was important. If you did a hazard-based study, a scientific approach, a scientific risk assessment, the biggest risk for this one was erosion. No, what am I saying? Was actually, it was landslides. Landslides. And landslides doesn't even appear on this list. The people felt like their risk, their vulnerabilities, their hazards were way more different than what we thought the vulnerabilities were. Right? So there's a difference. So this is using a bottom-up approach. And if I came in and said, we're going to do stuff based on landslides, that's a top-down approach. We don't actually address what these people are thinking. Does that make sense? It's common sense, right? It's common sense. Like, how can I come to your house and say, I'm going to move the sink here, and I'm going to break down this wall, and I'm going to put, a mattress here, and I'm going to put a bed desk here. You're going to say, no, you're not going to do any of that. This is my house. I know my house better than anybody. I know where to put my things, right? You wouldn't tolerate anybody coming to you and telling you what to do. But this is what a lot of development professionals do, is that they maintain their own hazard risk management system, or maintain their own needs assessment, and not go and actually look at what the community is asking, what the community is thinking. It's common sense. Okay, so from there we started creating an indicator. So we said, okay, so what can we start mapping on this map? The first thing was, we can map houses, we can map schools, and we can also map locations, roads, and whatever. Sorry, I just put it on high. So then you have all these different things. You can also have vulnerabilities on this map. Okay, so pregnant women was one of the things I mentioned, right? So you can actually identify pregnant women by assigning it to a push pin. We'll get there, actually. You can assign, so this is one of the, this is how a map ends up looking like. You have a 3D map, you have different push pins that symbolize different colors, and then on top of that you have house numbers. So this is what they call aggregated data. Data that has been aggregated, which means one data point shows multiple modes of information. This one data point, red push pin with number 40 on top, shows that this house is number 40, house number 40 on the road. It shows the spatial location of the road. It also shows that the house is made out of brick. Okay? And if you look at it next to it, not this one, maybe this one, there's a smaller pin next to it that shows there's a pregnant person living in that household. Or there's an elderly person living in that household. Automatically the uses become really interesting. You can show information about people in a community through this map. Yeah? Makes sense? So imagine trying to draw this information on a two-dimensional map. It'll be way too difficult, right? You have a 2D map on the wall, and you have lots of information. No one can read that map, right? There's too much to say. But on a 3D model, you can show lots of information at once. And you don't need a scientific background to understand it. A relief model, like with the contours and the ones, lots of elevation maps, you need a scientific background or some sort of GIS knowledge. You guys are university students, you have education. But farmers and people out there that are working every single day that don't have formalized education may not be able to access that information if you show it to them. They'll say, I don't want to be involved myself. This is too much for me. I'm busy trying to feed my family. But on a map like this, you have information that can be accessible to lots of people. A farmer can look at this and say, I understand. A person like a workman, a construction worker that doesn't have mapping knowledge, they may have, farmer has a whole lot of other things, but they may not have mapping knowledge, will be able to look at this map and say, I can understand. You can understand, right? And I just showed this to you. I didn't have to explain this, and I can show you, you can understand this. So, someone that isn't university educated can also understand this as quickly. That accessibility is what makes community-based practice really important. Is what makes participation so important. We find ways in which we can reduce the knowledge barrier between scientific knowledge and accessible knowledge. And this is local knowledge. So, and it's a local knowledge that is shown scientifically because it's to scale, right? It's to scale. The information on here, the distance between this house and this house, is the same distance ratio in this map than it is to real life.